Doug Howard, President of Growth Team Strategies, here with another episode of Selling the Dream, and here with another weekly session with Kathi Fleck. Kathi, how you doing today?
I'm great, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm finally waking up. My brain is starting to catch up with my mouth, which is excellent. That's not
Have
always
a little
the case.
coffee.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about sort of the idea of a key to a smooth transition. So unlike a lot of our other conversations, which are about things to do way in advance or things to be thinking about to keep the business strong, this really assumes that we're at the point of having found a buyer, gotten an offer, worked out a deal, and now we got to make a transition, right? And the reason this is relevant, I think, to the folks that are listening is by thinking about what a good transition needs to look like, it does help us think about things that we want to be true in the business that maybe aren't quite true yet, right? So, when you think about a transition, I know when I sold my business, there's sort of the legal and math and money side of the transition, and then there's the people side of the transition, and then there's, the outside world that doesn't know we're going through a transition, the customers and the vendors and that kind of thing, right? And in all of it, for everybody involved, we want it to be as smooth a transition as possible. Usually someone coming in is smart to just absorb the operation, not make a bunch of changes on day one, just get in there, get settled, then decide what to do about it. For the person selling the business, especially if you have a financial stake in it, it's really important to see that continuity. We don't want the wheels flying off the wagon. And then, of course, any preparation we do, as we were talking about on our last episode, you can never count on these things being done until they're done. And so we want to make sure that any of that preparation for transition isn't going to be disruptive if for some reason the deal doesn't go through, right? So when you were looking at, Kathi, when you get to the point of, okay, we've got a deal, we've got a timeline to settle, what were some of the major transition issues? What were the kinds of things you were talking about, particularly with the buyer?
Well, I think we really, going back in my mind, I think we really started talking about that transition after the sale closed. We met in my office and then went over what were we going to do about staff, introduction of staff, clients, trades, connecting him with all of the different resources that I had. And so we spent some time just evaluating it and then what parts I was going to do, what parts he was going to do. So for example, anything that was online, I had to stop my accounts, stop my name in the accounts and transition them over to him. Yeah. And so then his staff had to go and pick that up. We had some technical challenges with it, which caused some issues just trying to get like Google, for example, or the internet, however those work. But then staff. So I told my staff before I introduced them to the new owner, as client meetings were coming up, I called them and told them what was happening and then brought the new owner over to meet with them. Those were existing clients. So there was mixed feelings, I think, with some clients. Some I had just signed up and they were disappointed that I wasn't going to be there. And so I did stay with those clients and help that transition. Others that were pretty well in place were more comfortable. Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful. I'm glad that you could do that. So there was just kind of mixed feelings. And, it was all new to me. I didn't have any idea what I was going to really be walking into. I think if I had to do it over, I probably would have plotted out each of those things a little bit more because there were some challenges that came up.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's interesting too, that as you're kind of walking through it, right, there are those things that you can kind of plan for. Some of it's an evolution as you're going. But a lot of it comes down to kind of getting to some level of agreement as to what we want things to look like when the reins get handed over. Now, Kathi, obviously you're in the remodeling business. I was in the accounting business. Accounting business was a little less challenging because we generally, other than maybe like the middle of tax season, didn't have things that kind of lingered over months. You did April's work and it was April's work, and you make a business transition as of such and such a date, and the work itself, other than maybe a client that was behind or something like that, didn't have a lot of carryover. in certain industries, though, that's not true, right? Obviously, for that reason, accounting firms generally don't transition in the middle of tax season unless there's an emergency
Yeah.
or something like that, right? You sell them in October, November, you start the new year, you have a clear divide. That's one approach. But no matter when you sell a remodeling company or a construction company or anything that has, things that go over multiple months and things like that, it's a little challenging because you're always going to be midstream on projects, right?
Right.
So how'd you look at that? Because that to me would seem to be a challenge, not only in terms of like, well, whose money is whose, but also like, we got a customer that's got half a remodel done on their house,
Right.
right?
Right. We
It
did
has
have
to be
that. Yeah.
discussed.
Yeah. Well, we did discuss that, and any new business, I was still signing business. Any new business just went over to him. And then any business that was existing, we had several different phases throughout the sales process as far as which monies I earned in that project versus which monies were going to be going over to the new owner. So we did have that cutoff, and we decided that any new business and any new bills would be taken care of by the new owner.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did get in touch with my resources, such as advertising. And one company that I was working with, I had been with them quite a few years, and I had a very good price with them because I was one of the founding members. And they would not carry that over with the new owner because they had to do background checks and more investigation. And so it wasn't a good fit for the new owner to take on this same advertising source. So, those decisions had to be made as we went along.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important for sellers to realize too, and I had to kind of experience this myself, but as much as you can discuss and negotiate, once you sign on the bottom line, really that buyer has the discretion to do what they're going to do,
Right.
right?
They
And
do.
so
Yeah.
whether it's keeping a particular location open or
Hmm.
keeping staff or and sometimes their circumstances change, sometimes their
Right.
perspective change. Sometimes I don't think they share everything they're going to do with a seller anyhow.
Oh,
Uh,
no, I didn't get that. So I had just put the website together in 2019, and it was becoming very organic and effective. Well,
uh-huh.
I didn't even know it. All of a sudden, the new logo pops up, and then the new website pops up. I
Yeah,
mean, it was
yeah.
just all different.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think, and I've been on the buying side as well, but I think there's a relatively short tolerance for most buyers to get advice, a lot of advice from most sellers,
True.
right?
It
You
was
know?
that did happen with me as well. And I was told continue running as is. So that's what I did. I didn't even think twice about it. And
Yeah,
I was put in my place pretty quickly.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, no, no, me too. And I kind of get that.
Mm-hmm.
When I bought my business, the person that I had worked for that sold it to me, he had lots of other interests, lots of other things going on, was relatively absentee operationally. So when we took over, it was more continuing the things we were doing as a leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as challenging. And I guess I kind of, you kind of expect that a little bit when you're selling. You think you have all this sage advice and yeah, and sometimes, and of course, I had someone buy my business that was already in the industry, had their own way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know. But I think that's just something that's important to keep in mind because, first of all, you can't promise anything to anybody beyond the day of settlement because it's
Right.
not in your control anymore. All right.
Yeah. It is, and the difficult part for us business owners is we have put so much of ourselves into the business. And I was told by the new owner that he didn't think I wanted to let go of the business. And I said, I do. I just was running it because, that's what we had agreed to do. So I think both of us could have handled it a little differently if we were to say, okay, you do this part and I'll do this part. So rather than us both assuming we should continue running the business or run the business.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point there, Kathy, because I think, and this is something that I see as we're doing more and more coaching folks through the transition process, is that I think there are things that we can initiate in the form of conversations to say, hey, these are some things to be thinking about because you're going to run into this situation.
Yeah.
You're going to experience that,
Right. And
right?
when you don't know, I mean, I didn't know. I had never sold a business before.
Right.
And it is a very emotional thing. It's basically your baby. So,
Yeah.
you have so much of yourself in it that it's hard to let it go. And I think those open conversations as far as who's going to do what or discuss it would have been more helpful too.
Yeah. Well, and I think it becomes even a bigger issue if there's any form of seller financing or if there's a significant amount of seller financing, right? Because the bottom line usually is there. I've still sold the business. You have a financial obligation to me. I certainly have a vested interest in your performance. So I might even be more prone to tell you how I want you to run the business.
Right.
And yet I have no more authority to do that unless that's something that's part of a deal. And that's why sometimes we see that people's succession, especially if it's with a team that they're putting in place or they have a known successor, sometimes they're better off to like have some ownership transition. You know, that secondary, that new owner has 20%, 25%, 30, 35%, because it gives that seller the ability to keep some measure of control. Yes. I always tell people, you got to also realize that once you go over 50%, the world changes legally anyhow, right? Because sometimes I'll have people say, well, I'm going to transition 20% a year for 5 years. And it's like, okay, well, the end of the first year, that successor has 20%. The end of the second year, they have 40%. But then at the end of the third year, they have the majority and really can make any decision about the business. So a lot of times what I like to do is say, if that's going to be the case, I like to see people have a progression up to about 49%. And then that next transaction needs to be to buy the rest of it, right? Because as a seller, and not everybody does that, and for some people it works out, but for me as a seller, I don't want to be a 25% owner with no control over what's going on in the business I created.
Right, especially if you're wanting to move out of it. Yes, I agree.
And so I just think that whole notion of what does a good transition look like? What things do we need to agree on post-sale become even more important if there's seller financing involved as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I think also for a lot of folks that sell their business, you know, their reputation, their role, you know, the community is important. And I do think it's fair to, you know, at least raise some of those things and have some of those discussions about, hey, you know, if it's going to stay with my name, if that's what I'm going to sell you, like, you know, you'd like to have some discussion and maybe some assurances of things that will and won't happen. You know, otherwise, you know, you may be wanting to look at, well, let's transition the business and the assets. But, you know, I don't want Doug Howard Enterprises out there in a you know, in an environment where someone else is reflecting what that is and what that means. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the connection we have with the community is because of how we've operated, you know, over the years.
Well, I think as business owners too, I did anyway, have felt a responsibility to my clients. So here these clients chose my company, but they also chose me, and I was very hands-on. And so I felt that responsibility to make sure that that transition went smoothly for them. And then new jobs that he took on himself, I didn't feel that same kind of ownership because I wasn't involved with it at all.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. Well, Kathi, I think it's something that people need to be thinking about. I think as we continue to do our work with folks, it's good for us to be thinking about conversations we should be encouraging them to have. And, you know, I think that whole transition is important for everybody has a stake in that transition going smoothly, going successfully.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kathi, thanks for being here again and for sharing some thoughts. And, you know, we'll be back next week with another episode of Selling the Dream. So thanks.
Always good, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast starring Doug Howard and Kathi Fleck. Both Doug and Kathi have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.